YouTube channel afterwards and hand over. Thank you. This is my third, right? Kazaka, that's it. Yeah. Can't say no now. Um, so this week is Parsha Vayechi, and um, there's a machlok. Do you hold the Torah open? Personally, I think probably we should hold it open. That's the psak of the Ramah. The Ramah says hold it open. There's a whole thing by the Vilna Gaon that should you look in? I think the Mishnah Berurah talks about it. Should you look in? It's as if you might be seeing the brachas from the Torah, and therefore don't look into the Torah. Side the Vilna Gaon says no one will accuse the Torah, and therefore you can look at. Why am I saying that? Because, well, as a Bal Koreh, I always prefer people to open the Torah, right, and see the brachot, because I can then visualize where I'm starting, and I can go straight there. And I think that's the reason, by the way, why the Ramah says that. It's just like I always say, like you make a bracha on an apple, because you don't put it in another room. Go appropriate, and then I'm going to search for the apple somewhere. Right, you have the apple in your hand, so you should have in your mind knowledge immediately where you go. I say that because that's usually pretty easy anyway, because most parshiot, or all, large majority of the parshiot and the sidra, start with what we call a ptucha or a stuma. So the only real sort of punctuation that occurs in Sefer Torah, right, punctuation in the sense of separating out words, sentences, paragraphs, is the old parshiot. Rambam lists actually the Mishnah Torah in the 8th chapter of the Hilchot Sefer Torah Mezuzah Tefillin, which are the open. So when you've got almost like a tab key, when you put 9-letter gap, which is a stuma, a closed gap, or a ptucha, which is like pressing the return key. It's an open gap, next line, new line. And that's the only real, in a sense, punctuation, right? We don't have the ta'amim in the Torah. Ta'amim are not in the Torah. They may well be Masorah, tradition, the ta'amim of some sort, but they were never put inside the Sefer Torah itself. They're a separate tradition. So the only thing that separates, but when it comes to Vayechi, what's interesting is not just a stuma in the sense of 9 letters. It's not even any, it's 1 letter. Right? You really have to hunt for a Vayechi when you are a Bal Koreh, because there's no separation from the Parsha before to Vayechi. You don't get end of line, new line, next Parsha, Eile Toldot Noach, right? Or Vayishma Yitro, whatever. It's there, just it's a carrying on from what has happened before, which is that at the end of Parshat Vayigash, we get this whole economic indenture, right? This framing of liquidity that Yosef does, where he sells everything to Paro, even the people are sold, so that money can be freed up. And it says, "But the Haaretz the Paro," right? The land was owned by Paro, and Vayeshev Yisrael, right? Yisrael lived there with his family, and Vayechi Yaakov, Beretz Mitzrayim. By the way, that Yisrael that Yaakov referred to, he lived a certain amount of time in that, and then he died, right? And this is the death and the story of Vayechi. The parsha is about the death of Yaakov, right? And Yosef as well. So, okay, the question I suppose is, why do we start the parsha so closed? Why do we start the parsha where we never really do that? If you look at the Torah, start it next pasuk. Why do we do that here? I don't think we necessarily know immediately. Rashi, if you look, I bring the parish of Rashi, which is relatively well known. I mean, Rashi's interesting, isn't he? Because Rashi says of himself, Ani bati liyashev shuto shel mikra. Early in Bereshit, I think Perek Gimel, if I remember rightly, Rashi says, I come to solve the absolute meaning of the text. So he's a pashtan. He's someone that wants pshat, right? But there's a very big difference between Rashi's approach to pshat and Ramban. Ramban, I personally want my honest opinion, I'm sure Apikoros was saying this, I prefer the Ramban. I love the Ramban because the Ramban will take whole swathe of psukim and explain what's happening, explain what we, I suppose, in Yeshiva you call a mahal, a process of movement forward. He explains it out to you. The approach of Rashi is much more to say there might be a problem in the pshat, a question. I will answer it, and I will sometimes bring a midrash to answer it. So the answer, I remember members of my shul, I was a rabbi in Muswell Hill synagogue, not from shul, very few people have been to yeshiva. So they couldn't quite get Rashi because he's coming and bringing outlandish answers, questions. There must be a better way. And so this is a good example. Vayachi Yaakov, says Rashi, Lama Parsha Zo Stoma. Stuma. Why is it closed? Now, not Stuma in the sense of 9 letters. Right, one of the Mefarshim call it Stuma Mikol Vakol. It's completely closed. So this couldn't be a question to be asked if it was just a 9-letter gap, because that's not abnormal for a parsha to begin, a next sedra to begin after a 9-letter gap, right? But here, why is it completely closed? And what he does is he brings the opinions of the midrash, right? There's no pshat. If pshat is I'm trying to think, I put sort of banal meaning, just what's going on literally. A literalist, right? Liturgical, I don't know that I'm probably, whereas he brings a homiletical understanding. I'm going to get midrash on you, and that's the midrash. Since Yaakov Avinu died, we're going to see in this parsha, Nistamu einehem velibam shel Israel. The eyes and the hearts of Israel closed up mitzarat hashibud, from the pain, the suffering of the shiabud, right, of the slavery. So there's something in this parsha of a transition from a state of, in a sense, of sort of beginnings of Am Yisrael, foundations of Am Yisrael, to our first galut, our first real experience of galut. And Yaakov is the person who's at that crossroads. And therefore his death is going to be a stima. Isn't that convenient? Because it's a stuma, right? The reason, according to Rashi, right? Well, Rashi was 12th century, wasn't he? A Rishon, but relatively much. 1100? No, 11. Right. 10 to 11th century. Yeah. So 11th century. Yeah. So, so the reason that Rashi's coming along much later than the point at which Parsha, Sidras, as we know them, would have been devised, or we would have come up with them. So he's getting, in a sense, homiletical. Do we know why originally it was done that way? I don't know, but Rashi's saying, okay, do I care? There is some symbolic meaning here in beginning the Parsha of the death of Yaakov, right, and the movement to Galut as a stuma. There's a closeness here. And there's a second reason he gives as well, which is the Midrash as well, right? Davar acher, shebikesh legalot et haketz levanav v'nistam mimenu. He wanted to reveal, we're told, he gets up, doesn't he, on the bed, and he wants to bless, right, and says, I want to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days, it's implied. The Pasuk says later in the Parsha, whereas it could be understood after time. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you as the tribes. And so this Midrash gets in there and says, maybe Yaakov actually really wanted to talk about the end, right? Galut's coming. There'll be a Geula redemption from it. There'll be a cycle of exile and redemption. Right? I want to talk, and it left him. Somehow he couldn't. That's not my talk today, my little talk. But v'nistam mimenu, it was closed off for him. Another reason for the closure symbolism. That's Rashi's approach. But what I wanted to bring is his grandson, right? The grandson of Rashi, who is fascinating, and I personally really don't understand. I understand what he's saying, but you see something I think is quite fascinating. Says Rashbam, the Iker Hatchalat Parshazo, the real beginning of this Parshat right, Vayechi, is min Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim. Is from a pasuk earlier. There's a whole block of text earlier with the pasuk, and Israel dwelt in Eretz Mitzrayim, right? Where it then talks about this, is talking about the sale of the land to Egypt and Joseph's plan. And it couldn't. I laugh at this because it's right. Well, it could be called Vayeshev. We already got Vayeshev. That's what you call Balabatisha. Why is it not Vayeshev? Because we got another Vayeshev. We're going to do Vayeshev too. We would never have two. Do we have two parshas with the same name? No, we don't have parshas with the same name. But it's better because on that is connected, right? There's no stuma or ptucha. There's no 9 letters or next verse. Vayechi Yaakov, our parsha Yaakov. Ella. So why didn't they do what they should have done, which is start this week's parsha a number of psukim earlier? Shelo ratzu hakihilot, because says Rashbam, the communities. What is that? Didn't want to complete Parshat Vayigash with the words Vatahi haaretz leparo, right? So they didn't want to end it, and the land is Pharaoh's. Why, I don't know, because clearly it's Mitzrayim, so that's Mitzrayim, right? Why should maybe it's implying that Eretz Israel, Canaan, God forbid, would be Pharaoh's. Because we know that, I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, I didn't prepare that bit, I should say, but we know, don't we, that Eretz is often related to Vatahi haaretz litzmitut, Vatimacher haaretz, right? Kili kol haaretz, right? We say, don't we? We could refer to Eretz Israel, actually. So it could be there's this sort of, I don't want to end like that because it's a bit too close to the bone in understanding Paro to have control. We don't want to grant Paro. It's not a nice way to end. So we'll just go on a bit and we'll end it Vayeshev Yisrael, something not about Paro and about Israel. I just think it's interesting to think of maybe the fluidity of the definition of the Parshas. Whereas Psukim are a lot more rigid. We talk about Ezra, but Moshe Rabbeinu actually. Right, the Gemara says, Kol pasuk lo pasuk Moshe Rabbeinu, anan lo paskinan. Any verse that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't split, we don't split. And so we believe that the Psukim, the Sof Pasuk, generally comes down from Moshe Rabbeinu, apart from certain Psukim where we have a doubt, right? And there's 2 places in the Torah where we have a doubt. One of them is the Aseret HaDibrot. Are there Aseret HaDibrot a series of Psukim or 10 Psukim? Each Dibra, that's fine for Anochi, right? So when it comes to Zachor, and you'll remember, right, in Shul, when you go to Shul on Pasha Yitro and Shalom, we do Ta'am Elyon, don't we? We do that very flowery, sort of more dramatic approach, where each of the Dibrot is a verse. Even Zachor, which is quite long, is a whole verse, is one long verse. And the other one is the menorah. The Gemara talks about the menorah, that there was a one or two percent of the menorah in Parshat Truma, where there's a suffix as to how to read a verse. But generally, the verses don't understand. But the Parshas, there seems to be fluidity. Rashbam is saying the Kihilot, the communities didn't like it. So it's possible that at one point they did end it, right at the end of the giving over of the land to Paro, the ownership, the whole Joseph plan. And next one will start by and he lived there, he dwelled there, and they changed it, right? They didn't want to end there. I think that's really fascinating. And I bring you 2 other opinions here, which really attest to this fluidity, right? The Hatam Sofer, 19th century, She'ein Chiluk Sidrot Me'ikar Adin. The separation of Sidras is not core law. I'm not saying we now go around and change, and we don't, but it probably will have impact on, I'm pretty sure this is part of a tshuva of Hatam Sofer, because I looked what happens if you, on Rosh Hashanah, you go too far on day 1 into the next days, you read a bit of the Akedah. Get a bit excited as a Balkoreh, and you add a few psukim of the binding of Isaac onto the first day's Lenin. And his answer depends on core are the Sidras, is the splitting into parshas. The Kaman, even though we're told later on in Shas, from a reference before, the Kvar Hayachilut Sidrot, Noeg Gambi Mehem, Yeah, we're told that in the days of Chazal, in the Talmud times, there was a separation into Sidrot. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, it's explained in Chavte Amud Bet, this is Megillah, in Tractate Megillah, De'eno la'akev, it's not la'akev. How do we explain that? It's not something which prevents you fulfilling the law. If you don't do it, you're okay. Because because it says in the Gemara, and this is his proof of it not being Ikra Din, or fluidity, the B'nei Ma'arava maskula raita betlat shani. The people in Eretz Israel in the days of the Gemara finished the Torah in 3 years. And we've heard of that. Probably, I'm sure many of us have heard there was a triennial cycle and a annual cycle. I think I remember reading the Encyclopedia Judaica that the good thing about the triennial cycle was that in one of the years, the Pesach story would come before Pesach. Obviously, it couldn't be all 3 years because it's done for 3 years. And there might have been something about that. Who knows? But what it does show, there was a little bit of fluidity here. There were two different traditions. One where you finish it in a year, one where you finish it in 3 years. So in different shuls, you're going to be doing different laning. Of course, it's ironic today that the Reform community took on the triennial cycle. They do a lot more stuff that shouldn't be done around it. But it is really interesting. And there's this very interesting book called the Chazei HaTnufa, which is it's the 1800s, and it's a compendium basically of the halachot of the Rosh, Rabbi Asher. And he brings down here, Chiluk Hastari v'chibureihem, right, the separation of the parshas, so that the reading of the Torah can be done in a year. That's the shtick. You finish the Torah. That's the shtick. Ulechein, therefore, kol chacham be'iro ubarzo. Therefore, every sage in his city or in his land, chiber be'frida starim, separated, right? Or authored. I mean, not authored, obviously, in the literal sense, but he'd be freed, separated out the parshas, kafei aseder shara shua naot, according to the order in which he thought was the best. And this sidur, this order, is not fixed halacha. So I'm not an expert on this. This is learning I've done in research, but I find that really fascinating. From being a rabbi, I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, parshas, they're really important. That's what it is. It's stuff, it's truma, it's, we're not going to change them, obviously. That's what we do. Minhag is minhag. That's what we do. But it would be fascinating to look at how that evolved. I'm sure there's work done on it over time, where you've got the Rashbam talking about the kihilot, communities wanting some change. They don't like the way it's ended. And you've got the Chazei HaTnufa saying, well, as long as you get them all done in a year, that's good. How you split it in terms of the topical, thematical split, right, is up to you in a way. And to end, you've got a return to symbolism through the Sfat Emet, who is the Gera Rebbe of the 19th. One of the Gera Rebbes, which one was he? Avram Yitzchak, I think it was Avram something, but he was altar, Rabbi Alter. They were all altars, right? You had the Chidushei Harim, you had the Sfas Emes, and then you had the Imre Emes, the three sort of main ones. And then the ones after that, the Lev Simcha and what was it? The Lev Simcha, and there was one others are buried at the Shuk Machane Yehuda. You know that? Opposite the Shuk, there is the facade of the Gera Yeshiva, which was built, and a burial place, because they couldn't, I think Imre Emes is there, because they couldn't get the Imre Emes to the Mount of Olives because of the War of Independence. And they had to bury him outside. And that is now basically Machane Yehuda. So you go buy your berekas, and then do some tehillim with the kever of the So he basically says here, quoting the midrash that Rashi quoted, that what Yaakov's, in a sense, passing, right? There's a two-stage passing to Yaakov. There's the end of the vitality of Yaakov, which, in a sense, and his passing, which leads to a spiritual ending of the period of time leading up to that, a spiritual beginning of exile. And then there is the shiabud itself, the slavery, which is the physical area, the physical parameter of exile. And I think that's really quite interesting to bring that reason, right? If you look at the word therefore, which is about 7 lines down, therefore this parsha is closed. This vitality, chayos, right? We say this is chasidus, right? So he's not bothered by pshat again. He's like, he's back to the midrash. Chayus, right, is the opposite of the stuma. Stuma is a closed off of a vitality. Chayut is like Vayechi Yaakov. He lived. He brought chayut. He brought vitality. Right. Even according to the plain sense of the text, the galut itself did not begin until that generation had died. It was only that the eye of the intellect was closed before. For prior to the galut of the body, there was already the galut of the soul. And the soul, and the galut of the souls followed immediately upon the termination of Yaakov Avinu's vitality, Allah Shalom, peace be upon him. So we've looked at, and hopefully I've opened up a question. The Vilna Gaon used to say people who read the Abarbanel, the Jew would go home, read the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel is a really difficult commentator because he's got 6, 7, 8 questions first, and then he starts answering them. And he said that the Vilna Gaon supposedly, I wasn't there, said that the Jew who reads the Abarbanel becomes a heretic because he would go home from shul, read all the questions, fall asleep after all that, and you only have questions and never the answers. So I like to give questions. I have given also some approaches, but there's obviously something for you to go and think of as well and look up, which is why is it closed completely? Why do we begin the parsha? And how fluid are the organization over time of the subject? Have a good week.
Very much. It's very interesting. I will. We've got a Kaddish coming up now for those who want it. I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom.